welcome to Nyko's RPG. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this is Game Master's Soapbox. Tonight, we are going to be asking one of the greatest questions that I've ever been asked, and also one of the worst questions I've ever been asked. And I hope that you will be at least entertained. So before we get started, make sure that you go down and let the algorithm know that you're part of our audience by clicking all the buttons below, and subscribe if you want to keep following interesting and helpful tips for game masters and players to make their games the best that they can be.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame, our strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.
All right, so the other day I got into a conversation with a person who had watched some of my videos and asked me fundamentally point blank, what's the purpose of a game master, or what do we need them for? As a matter of fact, they're, in my estimation, to be an antiquated and useless artifact. What does a game master actually do anyway that players couldn't do for themselves? And this led me down a bit of a rabbit hole as I went looking for justification, perhaps, for my existence. And I've come up with basically 10 things that game masters are, at least ostensibly, tasked with in roleplay. And I'm hoping to get some input from you as well. If you watch this video and you have an idea, please go ahead and put in the comments what you feel the game master's purpose is and what he is doing here. If you need to pause the video to give yourself some time to do that, feel free. The honest truth is that as a game master, I'm pretty confident with what I'm here to do. And so while I may be poking fun at it from point to point as we go through this, the overarching story of what I believe Game Master is here to do will make itself evident as we go along. All right, so the first thing that a Game Master has to do is coordinate players. Generally, to have an event hosted at a location, whether it be your own house or at a game store, you have to coordinate with somebody, and someone has to do that task, has to set the time and the place and the details of that encounter period, that game session. And so the Game Master's primary major role is to make sure that the game happens. And certain game masters can relegate this, and certain game masters draw players simply by saying, I'm going to host a game on this and such a day. But it's really important to do the effort of putting the session together, coordinating who's going to be there, how many players you're going to have, and the like. This is something definitely a game master is generally expected to be a part of. The second thing is to administer oversight. Certainly, if you were going to be going to a sporting event at a soccer field, a football field, and you were going to be expected to stay for a certain period of time, and someone had to make sure that the equipment got turned back in, make sure that the lights get turned off and all of that. A game master's job is really at the perimeter of the event. He has to make sure that the game play is fair and equitable and inclusive and kind, and all of the things that we've talked about in other episodes. As a matter of fact, my kindness video, I'll put a link to it because I think it's a really important video, and sometimes we lose sight of what's really important, and that is definitely one of the things that needs to be kept to the forefront in role-playing games in particular. But the idea that the game master's duties include oversight is not a small task, especially when you're talking about a group of players who may have multiple agendas and reasons to play, and somebody has to keep the herd of cats operating within the same time frame and purpose. One of the biggest pieces to being a storyteller or a game master is to set the stage, to describe the setting. If you are utilizing miniatures and terrain, then to have set all of that up so that it's right exactly where the players can get to it, that it's understandable, and any particular parameters are provided so that the players can operate within that play zone. They have to be able to describe the scene in detail and to administer any questions or concerns to make sure that the players feel the tangibility of the game session so that the actual gameplay can occur. Of course, the game master also is the one who provides the loot. If a character is perceived to be advancing in a story, often they have to have appropriate items, appropriate equipment. If they are going to fight off increasingly more powerful monsters, they have to also be equipped with the appropriate and commensurate level of powerful equipment and tools. And so it's the game master's job to make sure that that happens so that the sessions are perceived at least to be fair and equitable between the players that are at the scene, and to ensure that they receive them in a timely fashion and are apprised of the abilities that that equipment might have. Of course, the game master's job is to also be arbitrator when there is a difficulty or a conflict or a contest of some sort. The game master is the one who determines whether you've succeeded in your task. The idea of an arbitrator is, at least at the very minimum, a person who keeps the peace between the players as they interact with the environment and with the villains. Now, if you'll notice, I'm being pretty specific when I'm describing these particular skills and requirements, because they are not capturing the spirit of what I am suggesting, but instead they're specifically providing the outline to the substance of the game master. So the idea of an arbitrator is, at the very minimum, his task to keep the peace among the players and the villains in the scene. Ultimately, he has to be the judge, jury, and executioner. If something is apprised to be going problematic in the game, it's the game master's job to bring the players together and tear them apart if they're being too aggressive with one another. The idea here is that the game master's arbitration limitations are paramount and are arguably superior to that of the players, because somebody has to be able to keep the peace and draw the line. The most recent Dungeons and Dragons edition stipulates instead a concept of conciliation, but this is problematic because when you reconcile between offending opponents, if there is not a singular arbitrarily chosen judge to be the differentiator, then the tyranny of personality can actually drive one player into the role of being judge, jury, and executioner who really shouldn't be, or really goes beyond the line of fair play. And this has been talked about in other channels, and I'm not going to go too deeply into it. But the idea of the judge, jury, and executioner, the final arbitrator of rulings and such, really should be left in the hands of the game master for a myriad of reasons. When it comes to role-playing, one of the biggest challenges is that the games can sometimes get quite out of hand, and so the game master really needs to be the barometer of silliness. If the game master has gone off the rails, so to speak, so goes the game, and the players will find, perhaps for an individual session, they might find it refreshing, but in the main, the concept of a out of control, silly adventure can be problematic and lose players more rapidly than any other variation thereof. It also means that the game master is a balancer of encounters. In other words, he has to keep track of not only what the players have in terms of equipment and advancement in order for the game to provide that very necessary feeling of potential loss, but he also has to be very clear on what the actual balance is between the villains and the good guys, between the monsters and the heroes, so that there's not a breakdown in the communication process. When you have a unbalanced campaign, you end up with players who become dissatisfied rapidly with the way the sessions are going. Of course, in those moments when there's not a lot going on and the story has become rather tedious and, as dare I say, boring, it is the game master's fundamental duty, I would say. Perhaps that's too strong a word, but his job to keep things fun. The person who draws the line on what is going on and keeps the players in a positive environment really does a great job on keeping the players excited in staying within his game. All right, and of course the last part is arguably the greatest of the tangible obligations that a game master has, and that's for him to be a thespian par excellence. It doesn't mean that he has enough silly voices to choke a horse. It doesn't mean that he even does any sight gags well. But the idea here is that the game master is expected to be the cast of thousands. He has to be everybody that the players are not for the engagement. Now, in every one of these roles that a game master has, each of these duties and obligations, there is a tempering between the administration of justice, the arbitration of challenge, and the connectiveness between the players. And it really does become a matter of the game master holding his own within the audience. But there's one thing I haven't talked about, and this is, I think, the real center to what a game master does. The game master's obligation, in my estimation, is to be a creator of tales, a developer of the story. Yes, the players play a role within that, and the characters derive direction and guidance from what the game master has provided, and they are responsible for pushing the story towards its conclusion. But without having a game master who is established to create the story, the impetus of that group holding together week over week, month after month, fundamentally falls on its face. And I have seen dozens of times when a game master simply abrogates his duties and falls into these other particular roles, either because they're particularly strong players who want to be the drivers, or there are problems within the games group that allow for one or more persons to be fundamentally bullies. The point that a game master's guidance is needed is specifically the point of driving a story, and there has to be fundamentally a mechanistic reason for play, and that is, in my belief, the story. Of course, that leaves open the question, what do you think? If you are a person who feels that a sandbox is the only way to play, drop me a comment. Let me hear your opinion. If you agree with me, certainly I'm glad to hear that as well. But more importantly, I want you to realize that you as a storyteller have the opportunity to share your perspectives on what might be, and it's up to the players then to make whatever they see to be within that framework become the new reality. So I want to thank you for being here tonight, and I will see you in the next episode. as always, we record at least once a week, or at least once a day, and we will be back again on Monday. Thank you for being here, and as my grandfather would say, go play.